Greetings. Well, today let's talk about migration due to climate change. This is an odd one, actually. It kind of crossed my mind the other night when I ran across statistics on this that they have already figured out, well, think they figured out anyway, what parts of the United States, as we go through this climate change in the 21st century, what parts of the United States will actually be the most livable. In other words, if you're going to move because of climate change, where do you want to migrate to? Yeah, those statistics are already out there, and people are actually already using them. Pretty interesting. But it's not just human migration that I want to talk about here. I think I'll start out, though, with there are three things during climate change that will find it easiest to migrate and change their location. Weed seeds, insects, and birds. 1, 2, 3. Obviously, birds fly, right? And so it's easier for them to find different locations to live if they don't find where they're at to be suitable for their habitat anymore. Insects, definitely, and as climate warms, warmth is generally good for insect populations, heavier breeding, and also the ability to travel northwards into new areas and find new foodstuffs, because as the planet heats, the things that they were feeding on further south possibly are now gone, are not thriving anymore. So they move north looking for food. I'm aware that there's been a real disaster in coastal Alaska, southeastern Alaska, on the spruce trees because of a Mexican boring beetle that got into the state. As the climate warmed up in coastal Alaska, beetles from Mexico were able to move in and eat the spruce trees. I haven't been there since this happened. At one time, that area was just completely covered with like 3 kinds of spruce: white spruce, black spruce, Sitka spruce, and a 4th one, the hybrids between all of them. Yeah, it was just spruce everywhere you looked. Now I guess it's a lot of stumps. They're working on trying to introduce lodgepole pine. Hopefully it will grow in that area. Yeah, and so then, like I say, you got the weed seeds, you got the birds, and you got the insects. Those are the 3 things that will find it easiest to move. Polar bears, obviously, are not going to find it easy to relocate. They will end up on welfare eating cans of Spam instead of seals pretty soon. With the way this is going, it looks like. The time frame that we're dealing with has continuously shrunk as far as, we used to talk about climate change is somewhere out there in the future. Well, no. Sorry, it's here now. Yeah, it's happening. And then it's like, well, how far in the future? Well, these days, most of the real dire predictions go out at about 20 years, 30 years. By 2050, most of the predictions we see are going to say you're going to be experiencing some real significant differences in what you once knew. When it comes to human crops, for instance, and migration, well, crops that are planted annually from seed, like soybeans, corn, wheat, well, these things may not find it to their liking anymore in places where they've been. There may not be enough rainfall left in Nebraska, for instance, to be able to grow corn, perhaps. Things, may tend to move north, but the seed-grown crops are going to be more flexible than things like apple orchards, grapevines, orange groves. These are locked in their positions. You really can't pick them up and move them. There's no way to change that, and the problem is already occurring with grapes and wine. You need a certain climate for certain grapes to make certain wines. The certain climates aren't there anymore, and certain grapes aren't necessarily growing where they used to grow. Things that were working in California now probably work a little better up in Oregon, for instance, already. And so, well, the grapes just can't pick up and migrate. So if you got vineyards in California and you're a winery and you've been working with Chardonnay, for instance, this is your product, but if Chardonnay isn't growing right there anymore, you got a big problem. Economically, this agricultural aspect of crop migration is going to really get to be a thing. We're going to deal with more weeds, more pests, then some of the crops will be immovable. And I hear, some of the gardeners out there rejoicing, we're going to get to grow citrus trees in Seattle, Well, maybe, but the real problem with all of this is as climate changes, Earth heats, everything becomes more erratic. So like if Seattle never had 120 degree temperatures before, you'll probably start to have some every year. You'll have a few. On the other hand, if you hadn't experienced temperatures below 20 degrees often, you probably will periodically. That it will be like this as the planet heats up. The dynamics that cause the climate to move around, and even the jet streams will change. Big concern about losing the Gulf Stream, which is it's keeping northern Europe an agricultural area suitable for human habitation. So then on to, well, what are the problems related to human beings? Human beings have a natural temperature range. In general, you can look out there and see that the humans have really tended to settle, kind of in two sort of locations. One, average temperatures of 50 to 60 degrees. That seems to be perfect for human habitation, and adequate rainfall in soils to be able to raise crops. You got to have food, So that's going to change. Yeah, that's going to change a lot. We have places in the United States that, according to studies that I've looked at, which they claim will be the best or the worst places to live by 2050. Varies depending on what studies you're looking at. Okay, and maybe the logic in some of these studies is lacking. Some of the studies seem to be looking at, coastal flooding. Coastal flooding is going to be a big deal. By 2050, for instance, New York City and Miami may no longer exist as we knew them. They'll either be like some of the Dutch architects they're working with, where the buildings will be floating, we'll literally float them, or they'll be on some kind of stilts or something, because the ocean's going to come in. And so, of course, that Miami, most studies will show that Miami's history, that's not going to last long. It's too close to the ocean. But then again, I see some studies that claim that the state of Florida, for instance, state of Mississippi, and states of Louisiana will actually be better places to be during climate change. And this one I can't figure out, because in all three, the coastal flooding will be huge, Florida particularly, but Louisiana, Mississippi, you're going to lose a lot of land down there near the Gulf of Mexico. They're also right in the midst of a hurricane and tornado alley, which those things are getting worse. So the logic in claiming that those three places are going to be better to live eludes me. I can't figure that one out. Now, they're putting Vermont, for instance, way up on the top of the list, a particular region there in Vermont that's elevated, it's away from the ocean, it tends not to get tornadoes, hurricanes, and things like this in general. And so they think that there's certain areas of Vermont which currently are not heavily populated at all. Really kind of backwards communities who are now aware that people are coming there looking for safety from climate. They're having to improve infrastructures. They don't have the sewage systems it takes, and so on. Michigan is another one that sits on the list. I guess it's a little too far north for the hurricanes, and they don't get a lot of tornadoes there. There would be some coastal flooding, I guess, because of the Great Lakes rising a bit. But in general, they figure Michigan will hold its own pretty well during all of this. That very well could be, although they also have Minnesota and Wisconsin on this list too. And of course, these are places I'm very familiar with, and I lived in Wisconsin for years. One of the things that worries me about that is that it's infrequent. They don't happen often, but there's a phenomenon known as a downburst line wind that all of those areas are susceptible to, and they happen as there's right along the jet stream. It's major deflection of continental air masses, and they're awful storms. The last one I sat through was 200 miles long, 15 to 20 miles wide. It knocked down everything in its path, and it spun tornadoes off on the inside, running randomly all over inside this storm. It was nuts. And we might see more of those in the future as climate changes. Hard to say. In the past, we've only seen them every few hundred years or so. That's why they're not well known. They only occur occasionally. But man, when they happen, I lived through one. Florida hurricane, you guys seen nothing. Check out a downburst line wind. They got a mini version of this they've named lately. They call it Derecho. It's a similar sort of a storm, but it's much smaller. Much smaller, Yeah, so they put that on the list. They got North Dakota and Montana are on the list of places. Now, again, I don't know about the logic. One of the things they're looking at is, hey, it's no coastal water. They won't get inundated by coastal water. I don't know. Really, the story is there are already people that are picking up and relocating themselves, preparing for the coming climate change, which is already here. Thank you. So my thought on the lists of bad places, good places to be during climate change, some of it seemed to make pretty good sense to me. Some of it, I don't know, I thought it was a little bit short-sighted that they weren't looking at the big picture as far as that's concerned. So if you're worried about climate change, I wouldn't be moving to Florida or Arizona, thank you. You probably won't see any coastal flooding or any hurricanes hit Arizona, for instance, but you could experience some really, really extreme heat and drought. Hard to say. It's looking to me like, for instance, the climate of Baja California, which is, the Mexican desert strip there. That climate is beginning to move northward into the main state of California, and it looks like it's moved itself pretty much on top of the Bay Area. But San Diego is already part of that climate, and LA will become more so, and it'll extend all the way on up to San Francisco. So in the process, things that cannot move, like redwood trees, for instance, Douglas fir, they will become extinct within the range. They won't be able to survive because as you get more and more heating, and more dryness, you're going to have more fires. They've already been, wrapping General Sherman and the national parks and stuff with fireproof blankets, trying to preserve the 2,000-year-old trees. Well, these trees can't pick up and move. They can't alter their nature to survive climate change. They simply die. That's what happens to them. It will take a little while, but they'll be gone. We might witness most of the oaks in that region also dying away, and seeing more cacti becoming more prevalent. That's at least my projection about what's going to happen there after having lived there for about 25 years. I've been seeing it coming for a while. Yeah, desert's moving north. When they do studies, though, about climate, weather, and a whole lot of other things, a lot of times they're looking at 48 contiguous states. They oftentimes will just completely omit Alaska and Hawaii. We don't count. There are people that still, refer to the mainland as the states, and this is Hawaii. Well, no, it's a state, really. But we get left out a lot. And in this study, I couldn't find evidence about either Alaska or Hawaii. My suggestion on Alaska would be there will be some coastal flooding. A lot of the towns, like Anchorage, for instance, sits quite flat to the sea. Homer, flat to the sea. Juneau, flat to the sea, and so on. There's a lot of coastal land there in Alaska that could get inundated. On the other hand, their climate in some places may be more stable. They're not going to experience like hurricanes and tornadoes and things like that. So Alaska could become a better place to live than it is now. Hawaii, they left that off the map. They didn't want to talk about Hawaii. Obviously, we're islands, we're in the middle of the ocean, coastal flooding. Yeah, Hawaii will experience coastal flooding, especially the older islands, which have flatter land near the shore where there are cities placed on them. Here, we got Kona sitting flat to the sea, and Hilo particularly sitting flat to the sea, at least in the old downtown area. The rest of the town is above. It's higher up. It goes up over 2,000 feet in places. And so coastal flooding will really mess up the old downtown area near the bay here. Other than that, it's not going to affect too much on the Big Island, because the Big Island rises so abrupt from the ocean. We're young land and we jut straight up, and so I don't think we're going to see probably more issues with our well water. Because if sea rises, the salt water in the bottom of the island rises too, pushing the fresh water up higher into the island and maybe limiting some of it or diluting some of the fresh water. That's the seawater is the only thing that keeps the fresh water hanging in the islands here. Otherwise, it'd all just run right out to the ocean. It floats on seawater like oil and vinegar and salad dressing. But it's my guess, even though they haven't talked about it, that we could see more hurricanes out here. Currently, the Big Island has never actually had one. They've come close, but never had one here. So we might see some in the future. I may even have to actually put my hurricane insurance back on. After I paid off the mortgage on the house, I took it off because there's never been a hurricane on this island. But, of course, the mortgage was sold through Oahu, where they've had plenty of hurricanes, and so they made me buy the stuff. I've let it go now that everything's paid off. But if the hurricanes start coming back, I might have to put it back on. Tornadoes are not possible. Huge rainstorms are like normal here. The truth is that as the ocean heats and the trade winds break down, what it means for Puna, Hilo, and Hamakua here on the eastern sides, we don't get the kind of wet weather that we used to. We don't get the kind of clouds we used to. The air is generally a little bit drier. Things are a little bit warmer. It's more sunshine. And generally on this side of the island, crops are growing better. They're not being as saturated with rainfall, They're getting more insulation from the sun. The weather here is getting better all the time. That might happen in Iceland or Greenland too. It might. You may find that Greenland is suddenly going to become a decent place to live. I don't know, but Hawaii is going to get flooded. We're probably going to see more hurricanes. There is definitely going to be more drought. And so, the tourist business and so on, that sort of thing is all attracted to the dry sides here. We have such rain shadows, and these rain shadows are going to get to be really important in the future. Right now, because Puna is not in a rain shadow, we're the only place in the state where we actually have adequate rainfall right now. The entire rest of the state's in moderate to severe drought conditions. We're just a little low on rain. We are not rating as drought here, and that will probably be the pictures of the future for Puna and Hilo, the places that were the wettest city in the United States of America of its size, may become very comfortable climate to live in as the rainfall disappears. I don't know, but I can feel it here. These days I feel more like I moved back to California than I moved to Pune because the rain has been disappearing. It makes it pleasant. I am actually kind of happy about it. There's nothing I can do to change it anyway. So I saw no studies, but it's very possible that there would be parts of the Hawaiian Islands that could be good places to live during climate change. That's my take, but I can't find statistics on it anywhere. Yeah, climatologists are already aware that Hawaii's got the best weather on the planet, and when the rest of the planet's weather goes to heck in a handbasket, ours will still be better. Probably. All right, folks, there you go. Migration due to climate change. Look out for the marching northward of insects, in weed seeds, desert, yeah. And step back from the coast if you don't want to go underwater soon. Aloha.